Most of the time, urban legends are stories that you heard from a friend of a friend, right? How many of you, because this is an audience of skeptics, right? How many of you have ever been told an urban legend by a friend or acquaintance as if it were true? Anybody? Oh man, it's too bad we don't have the camera the other direction, because an awful lot of hands went up. I also have had the same sort of experience. And when you hear something like that and it's coming from a friend or an acquaintance, you kind of don't know what to say, you know? It's sort of like, actually, well, that's really an urban legend. You don't want people to continue in their misapprehension of reality. But at the same time, you kind of don't want to be a spoil sport or somebody who's considered a real downer or somebody who's spoiling a good story, because that, of course, is what an urban legend is. In virtually every case of an urban legend, it's false. There might have been a grain of truth. Somebody might have actually come home and found their dog with a body part of some burglar, you know, true. But they've become embellished, they've become changed. Personnel, events, characters in the story. But there's a plausibility to urban legends that makes them believable, which is why we believe them and pass them on. But at the same time, they're striking, or they're shocking, or they're exciting. All urban legends have an appeal to the emotions of some sort or another, which is why we continue to tell them. They're narratives, they're stories, they're folklore. We love them. The term urban legend was first came into use in a book called The Vanishing Hitchhiker, which was written by the folklorist Jan Brunvand, who has spoken at skeptics conferences in the past, way back in 1981. Okay, skeptics, this is going to be an exercise regimen I can see for the next couple of slides. How many of you know The Vanishing Hitchhiker? You know the story of the vanishing? Wow, that's not as many as I thought. You know, the story is the friend of a friend, the cousin's relative, was in the car, or you know about this guy back in Nebraska, and he was driving along the car and he picks up this young girl who's hitchhiking. She looks kind of waifish, and she gets in the back and they drive along, and he strikes up a conversation with her. They're chatting. Oh yes, I live on this street and I go to this high school, and I'm 14 years old, and he gets up to the house and he gets ready to let her out, and she's gone. And then he finds out that, so-and-so lived in this house and died in a car accident. How many of you know the Vanishing Hitchhiker story? Right, a whole lot more of it. Okay, you just didn't know what it's called. How many of you know the Mexican Pet story? Okay, the Mexican Pet is this great story of a woman who goes down to Mexico, and she sold this little dog, and she brings it home and she trains it and she feeds it, and she takes it to the vet for inoculation, and the vet says, "Lady, you've got a rat." Yeah. A Mexican Pet. How many know the choking Doberman? Right. Okay. These, you got to know these, skeptics. These are wonderful stories. If you are not familiar with this whole series of books, you really have to check out Jan Brunvand's, because they're so much fun to read. And the teenager who was in a tanning bed and was cooked. And the ever popular exploding microwaved poodle. You got to know the microwave, but yeah, that's urban legends. We love them. Now, the thing about urban legends is that there's really no intention to deceive. If you're telling an urban legend, you're telling it because you think it's true. You're not telling it because you're trying to fool somebody or play a prank on somebody. People spread these legends because they're good stories, they're wonderful narratives, they're exciting, not because they're necessarily trying to deceive you. If they're trying to fool you, it's one of the other categories. It's a prank or a hoax or a fraud. Now, a prank is a playful act, and pranks are often performed between people who know each other. April Fool's jokes in the offices, for example, this is a common kind of prank. For example, a small nonprofit in Oakland, staff members received this epistle on April 1st. I'm very happy to inform you the board has decided on a new director for NCSE. This decision was made after very careful consideration and with the best interests of both staff and NCSE in mind. It will require my staying on for a few more years, however, and I have agreed to do so at the board's request. Kent Hovind is expected to receive consideration of his more or less good behavior in prison by having his appeal for early release granted. This means he would be available to head up NCSE and take over management duties in approximately 2014. You will all be pleased to hear that he intends to apply the same creative approach to accounting of salaries and wages that he used in his previous corporation, which will result in an immediate increase in salary for all of you, as taxes will no longer need to be deducted. Now, this is an example of a prank. Okay, it's intended to deceive, but in a playful manner, and there aren't any long-term consequences. Now, on the other hand, if we had posted this on the internet and creation, why can I not remember Kent Hovind's Creation Science Evangelism picked it up and put it on their website, then it would, then it would sort of edge up into the hoax category. But this is a prank. The distinction, I mean, staff pretty much figured this out by this top paragraph here. That wasn't too hard. But it's not always easy to distinguish between a prank and a hoax. I mean, all of these categories do grade into each other, and obviously it's not terribly important to distinguish all that finely and precisely. But it's kind of useful just as a way of thinking about these different kinds of, shall we say, deception. So what's a hoax, and how does it differ from a prank? Well, first of all, a prank is usually a private activity among friends. It's a smaller scale kind of thing. In the Museum of Hoaxes, they define a hoax as, quote, a deliberately deceptive act that has succeeded in capturing the attention of the public. Now, the emphasis is on public. Hoaxes are public, pranks tend to be private. But like a prank, a hoax can be something that's done just for fun, but they can be really quite elaborate. But classically, a hoax is something that is visited on the public. In 1999, on an unlabeled website, a German graduate student named Stefan reported on a hominid fossil found in New Mexico. This is an astonishing discovery. Hominids do not occur in North America. Trust me on that as a recovering physical anthropologist. You only find, the only hominids you find in North America is after Native Americans came over the Bering Strait sometime in the last couple tens of thousands of years. So this would be an absolutely amazing discovery if a hominid, a more advanced primate, something related to humans and apes, were found in North America. But what made Stefan's web post even more extraordinary is that this hominid was found in the jaws of an Allosaurus. You can see the Allosaurus indicated here, and in its mouth is the poor struggling hominid attempting to escape. Stefan was excavating under the direction of Professor Heinschwagel of Heidelberg University. And when they discovered, yes, Professor Heinschwagel, the well-known Professor Heinschwagel. And when they discovered the fossils, some very shadowy figures from the state government came out and took away the bones, the casts, the notes, and actually they confiscated most of Stefan's photographs. All the evidence is gone, although if you were to write Stefan at this safe email address that he had set up through a friend of his in the United States, remember he's a German graduate student, and this was written in somewhat broken English, so, you know. But yes, clearly there's a cover-up going on. There's a cover-up, and this is something we have to take seriously. Now, the sign on the truck says New Mexico State Resources, Paleo Division, Paul Hoax, Director. The initials are NMSR. Now, there happens to be another NMSR in New Mexico, and in fact, if you were to look at the state governmental agencies. There is no New Mexico State Resources Paleo Division, but there is our fellow skeptics group, the New Mexicans for Science and Reason, who truly rock. They're a great bunch of people. And in fact, Stefan's website was posted on April 1st. Now, is this a prank or a hoax? Well, it probably isn't terribly important. It was in any event great fun. And the NMSR did, in fact, generate a lot of discussion on creationist websites. Some, at least for a while, boy, this would sure be great if it were true, because it would certainly destroy evolution, because obviously dinosaurs and humans didn't live at the same time. And if this were really an accurate set of fossils, this is what we're looking for. They really wanted to believe it, but on most creationist websites, cooler heads prevailed, and only a few people were really fooled, for at least for a while. By the way, if you're going to set up a hoax, the best way to be taken seriously is to claim a cover-up. It is almost guaranteed to give you credibility immediately. Now, hoaxes can sometimes be similar to tall tales. Again, the definition isn't really as important as the seriousness of the intent to deceive as well as the consequences. In Australia, you may encounter stories of the drop bear, the range of which is presented on this slide from the web page of the Australian Museum in Sydney, which is a real place. They've got a great website. It's a great museum. If you ever go to Sydney, visit it. It's a wonderful natural history museum, and they have this totally deadpan page describing the Australian drop bear, which is a carnivorous marsupial about the size of a leopard. Thylactros plumatus is the species name. The feeding and diet of this creature are described on the museum website as medium to large species of mammal. Large mammals. Do you know what other creature in Australia is a large mammal? Drop bears hunt by ambushing ground-dwelling animals from above, waiting up to as much as 4 hours to make a surprise kill. The initial impact often stuns the prey, allowing it to be bitten on the neck and quickly subdued. Danger to humans and first aid is another section of the Australian Museum website. There are some suggested folk remedies that are said to act as a repellent to drop bears. These include having forks in the hair, or Vegemite or toothpaste spread behind the ears. There is no evidence to suggest that any such repellents work. Well, you can, I do recommend going to the Australian Museum website and look, just Google Drop Bears Australian Museum. This is a wonderful website page, and just read the commentary. The commentary alone is worth whatever time you want to spend. By the way, I had altogether too much fun writing this talk. It just took me hours and hours because I kept going off into these directions of following these wonderful things like the commentary on this. And of course, Australians, everybody knows Australians. They have a wonderful sense of, one of the cultural characteristics is a great sense of humor, I'm sure. I think when you were born in Australia, you sort of, absorb humor from everything around you. And so there's this wonderful back and forth. Oh yes, my cousin unfortunately was killed by a drop bear last. but maybe the funniest is the person who clearly must not have been born in Australia or something, because this is all a lot of nonsense. How can you possibly believe this stuff? and an Australian replied, "Cool it, mate. This is just all in fun." So anyway, and of course, the meme of the drop bear has spread quite widely, and you can find danger signs in various parts of Australia. And one of my favorite is the Australian drop bear rating, extreme danger of drop bears. And of course, it's completely inevitable that where there is a dangerous creature that is a problem for human beings, there is naturally going to be a preservation society as well. So anyway, so tall tales and pranks and hoaxes all kind of, blend into one another, and they generally are great fun. Now, in all of these, there's an intent to deceive, But there are distinctions in terms of the extent of the prank or hoax, and I would also say the spirit in which it is offered. Frauds, on the other hand, are a criminal form of deception, as the Museum of Hoaxes defines it. Someone gets hurt. One of the founders of the Bay Area skeptics was the late Robert Steiner, magician, skeptic, friend, who wrote this book, Don't Get Taken, on scams and frauds, bunco of various kinds. His book is used by police departments to train their personnel how to recognize scams. Now, with frauds, there is damage. The damage can be financial. Ponzi schemes are a good example of a financial fraud. People are hurt. Harm is generated. The other kinds of things that Bob talks about, like the confidence games, like the pigeon drop and so forth, these are all scams, frauds in which people get hurt. People lose their money, people lose their homes, people lose their reputations, bad stuff. The Nigerian letter fraud is known by everyone. That's just a modern manifestation of the prisoner's letter. There's all kinds of histories of these kinds of things that go on and on. Somebody gets hurt, somebody is trying to gain. Now, creationists claim that many fossils are fraudulent, and they are propagated by scientists who are merely trying to fool the public into thinking that evolution is real as a way of keeping the research money rolling in. We all know what a get-rich-quick scheme scientific research is. The publications of Jack T. Chick are where you can find abundant evidence of human evolutionary hoaxes. Chick is a very famous Christian pamphleteer. And of course, the most famous hoax or fraud in evolution is the Piltdown hoax. Now, Piltdown consisted of a set of skull fragments and a jaw found near a village in Piltdown, England by Charles Dawson, indicated by that arrow there, who was a British lawyer and amateur archaeologist in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. He had made a number of quite surprising finds before he found the Piltdown remains. He found medieval artifacts and Roman artifacts and prehistoric tools. And he even found remains of a fossil dinosaur. He found some dinosaur teeth. And he was considered to be quite a remarkable discoverer of these archaeological and even paleontological remains. Notice the careful excavation technique indicated by this photograph. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not how you do archaeology and paleontology. It is how it was done in the late 1800s, but certainly this is not anywhere remotely resembling what actual science occurs today. You very carefully lay out the area that you're going to excavate. You map the hell out of it. You photograph the hell out of it. You record every single jot and tittle that comes out of that square that you are excavating. You don't just go in with the shovel, and they do have a little, I don't know what the duck is doing there, but yeah, there's a little screen sort of in the middle there, kind of points up from the duck is at 9 o'clock, the screen's at noon. You don't just shovel dirt into a screen and see what comes out. It's not a very good way to acquire the appropriate context. Now, Sir Arthur Smith Woodward is the chap in the middle. Only the English would be digging ditches in vests and long sleeve shirts, but I digress, and hats. But Arthur Smith Woodward was probably the most famous British paleontologist of his day. And he worked at a museum at which Dawson was associated. And Dawson was a friend of his, and Woodward accepted the various finds that Dawson had made, including these most remarkable finds of human fossils in near this small village called Piltdown in the south of England, south of London. Unfortunately, Arthur Smith Woodward staked his reputation on the legitimacy of the Piltdown fossil. Now, I'm going to do I used to teach anthropology routine here. I have here, for your edification and enjoyment, a cast of the Piltdown remains. I also show the a reconstruction and also the actual fragments in the slide. But this is a reconstruction of Piltdown. The dark, who's fairly close to the actual color. The fossil fragments were stained a very dark color. And you can see there's part of a parietal here. There's a little chunk of an occipital in the back, a little part of a frontal, another parietal, some of the bones of the lower skull, but not a lot. And then there was this mandible, the jawbone, that was also found by Dawson. And the jawbone consists of part of the ascending ramus, as we say in the anthropology biz, and the horizontal ramus plus a couple of teeth. Now, all the white part is reconstructed. It's not all done, but it is done by mirrors in the sense that if you have the left-hand side of a fossil, you can reconstruct the right-hand side, right? Because of bilateral symmetry and the fact that you can use a mirror image. So at least this part is reconstructed from that part, but there's a lot of this skeleton that there's a lot of these two pieces that you just flat out don't have. So, you take the white part with a grain of salt. Now, will I be spoiling the story if I tell you that this turned out to not be a real human fossil? Probably not, so I'll just cut to the chase here. If I were going to fake something, I would do it very much like Piltdown. This is a really good example of how to fake a human skull, a human fossil. For one thing, the bones don't really articulate. Look at the cranial bones here. They don't really articulate with each other. You don't have a really good idea of what the cranial capacity of this specimen was. And that's important because if you're trying to pass something off as a human fossil, you want to know something about the cranial capacity because that's one of the criteria that we use to distinguish human ancestors from very early ancestors. Of course, it's a sequence, so there aren't any hard and soft lines. From this point, we have human. That nobody really does it that way, but it's a way of distinguishing your fossils from ones that are, say, ape fossils or other kinds of primates. So cranial capacity is a good thing. Another thing that would be really nice to have is brow ridges. Oops. No brow ridges. Oh well. Guess we can't tell a whole lot about how similar this individual would have been to other fossils like Homo erectus or Neanderthals or whatever, in which the facial morphology is quite important, and brow ridges are a really good diagnostic characteristic. So there's a couple of really good diagnostic characteristics of Piltdown that we just ain't got. And then when it comes to the mandible, this also is quite brilliantly done. Note the white part at the top of this mandible here. That's called the occipital condyle. That's the part that actually articulates with the skull. And that's also highly diagnostic in being able to tell the difference between an ape and a human. It's gone. Somebody was thinking. Also, like most aspects of the human skull, the mandible actually starts out in two pieces. You have a left piece and a right piece, and then there's a suture in the middle, which in an adult specimen, like all of us, has been long sealed. It seals very early in childhood, but it's called the mandibular symphysis. Symphysis is where two bones come together. And there is no mandibular symphysis, and there's no indication of whether or not this specimen had a chin. Chins are also very important in human evolution because it's only with Homo sapiens sapiens, the more advanced Cro-Magnon, as they're sometimes called, post-Neanderthal, shall we say, that you can really say you've got something that's very similar to modern humans like us. Well done, well done. The really diagnostic characteristics aren't here. So it's by the way, we'll have our friend Mr. Piltdown here over at NCSE's table, which is over there in the corner, when you have a chance to look at things during the break. So it was a very well-staged fraud in terms of its manufacture. It also was very attractive to people in the in 1912 when it was discovered, because it really reinforced people's ideas about how human evolution had taken place. The assumption of the time was that because modern day humans have these really big brains. That's kind of our major distinction between us and all other primates. We have this brain that is capable of all kinds of qualitatively superior processing and so forth, and we got a lot of gray matter in there. So big brain size was considered to be the distinguishing characteristic of human beings. So what they were looking for when they're looking for the missing link, when they're looking for the ape man, for the transitional fossil between apes and humans, they were looking for something that might have had a primitive ape-like face, but a big brain. Piltdown. The jaw was very ape-like. The cranial bones were very human-like. So this fit very well into what people expected to find. Now what made, so nobody, you know, that part of it was not really objected to, the fact that it had characteristics that they were hoping to find, shall we say. However, one of the other reasons why Piltdown was so popular is that there had not been at that time any human fossils found in Great Britain. The only human fossils that existed were the Neanderthals in Europe and the what they called Peking man, which we'd call Homo erectus today, which are found over in China. And nothing had happened in Great Britain. So there was a certain amount of national pride involved. We have the earliest ape man. So there was shall we say that the Piltdown fraud fell upon soil in which it could take root very easily. It was well-prepared soil, if you will. That said, it is also the case that Piltdown wasn't wholly embraced by all scientists. Many scientists and anatomists who looked at Piltdown considered it anomalous. Yes, they were sort of expecting to find more of an ape-like face and a big brain. That part didn't really bother them. What they didn't like is that the jaw was so definitely ape-like. The jaw was really, really apey. The skull bones were really, really, really human. And there was this mismatch. So right from the beginning, in fact, the Piltdown Discovery was described in 1912. In 1913, there was an article in Nature magazine, the major science magazine of Great Britain, comparable to Science magazine over here. An article came out in Nature saying, you know, for these reasons, the skull and the jaw don't go together. And of course, you notice the careful excavation techniques, you know. So it would be very difficult to demonstrate, oh yes, indeed, they really are, well, they are actually found several feet apart. So at least, you know, there was a good reason to believe, in addition to the fact that for this morphological disjunction, that the jaw and the cranial bones really, really didn't go together. Many others agreed. One of the things the creationists are very keen on when they talk about Piltdown is the claim that, oh, Piltdown was a fraud. It fooled people for decades and decades and decades. Well, not really. Right off the bat, there were a lot of scientists who thought, yeah, maybe not. Maybe this is not really the ape man we are looking for. But even more importantly, Piltdown's place in human evolution was challenged only about a dozen years later, in 1925, when Raymond Dart discovered the Tong infant, approximately 6-year-old child, in South Africa. Now, at first, Dart's child, as they called it, Dart's baby, which is one of the most wonderful fossils on the planet, it truly is. This is a cast. It consists of a facial portion, which, wonderfully enough, was articulated with a cast of the brain. It's just so cool. This is just such a, be sure you come and look at this. This is such a great fossil. And then there was this totally adorable little mandible that also was articulated with the jaw. Now, this creature, as you can see in the illustration there, was all in one piece, so to speak. There was never a question that the jaw and the brain and the cranial parts all fit. They all went together. There was no question. But Dart's baby, as they sometimes called it, didn't quite fit the going theory, shall we say, of how human evolution took place, because Dart's baby kind of turned that on its ear. It had more modern-like teeth, which we won't go into, although I can talk about teeth for a very long time. I wrote a dissertation on teeth 40 years ago. I will spare you. I will spare you. But the teeth were more human-like than ape-like. No big canines, no big anterior dentition that was, you know, chimpy or gorilla-y, the kind of thing that you tend to find in the non-human members of our ape-human branch. And yet at the same time, the brain was small, so it just totally flipped Piltdown. Piltdown had a big brain, ape-like teeth. This guy said human-like teeth, little brain. So wait a minute, what's going on? Well, you know, one of the nice things about science, and many of us are scientists here, all of us are people who embrace science. If you don't know, you say, I don't know yet. And we're very good at suspending, you know, judgment on things. Initially, people said, well, no, you know, no. This Australopithecus africanus is what it was called. This Australopithecine that Dart had found is probably just an aberrant ape, or it's too young, you really can't tell, but you could tell because it had permanent molars. Again. And besides, we've got Piltdown. Well, what happened then, of course, is that many more Australopithecines were discovered, and lots more, and even today we've got tons of them. And so Piltdown, with its big brain apey teeth, was looking more and more anomalous. The more human-like teeth, small-brained Australopithecines looked much more like this is the way human evolution had taken place. Now, so even by the 1920s, the idea of Piltdown as a valid human ancestor was coming under suspicion for morphological reasons, for scientific reasons. But suspicions about the validity of Piltdown also were reflected in suspicions about Dawson. Now, Dawson himself died of infection, septicemia, in 1916. Okay, 1912 is the discovery, 1916 Dawson dies, 1925 the Australopithecines, and things start to crumble in terms of Piltdown. Other people dug in the same sites that Dawson dug in after he died, but they never found any fossils. And people started noticing that the only time fossils were found is when Dawson was on the site or had been there the day before. May I call your attention once again to the rather unadmirable excavation techniques that I showed you in that earlier slide. It's very simple to slip in a fossil when nobody is looking and, oh my, look what I found, when you have excavation techniques that are that sloppy. In the 1950s, some new techniques became available that allowed for what we call still relative dating. You could take the amount of fluorine in a fossil, and in two fossils, and by the amount of fluorine that the fossils had absorbed, because bone absorbs fluorine from the soil, and the longer the bone has been in the soil, the more fluorine it absorbs. A fairly simple kind of test by today's standards. Fluorine tests would allow people to tell whether one bone was older or younger than another one, given other comparable environmental circumstances. So somebody thought, why don't we test Piltdown? So they did. They took the Piltdown jaw and cranium, conducted fluorine tests, and discovered that, guess what? They're totally different specimens. They didn't match. Kenneth Oakley, LeGros Clark, Joseph Wiener, using these fluorine data techniques in November of 1953, revealed that the skull came from a medieval European, the jaw from an approximately 500-year-old orangutan. I mean, not when it died, but you know, it died 500 years ago, is what I mean. And the teeth were from a chimpanzee. And the teeth had been filed down to look more human, and the whole specimen had been stained to look uniform in color and to look really, really old. It was a wonderful, wonderful fraud. So fraud or hoax? Well, who committed the fraud? Well, it's a long story. Dawson is the prime suspect, although he may have been aided by another worker at the museum, a man named Martin Hinton, who had a grudge against Arthur Keith Woodward. They may have worked together, they may have worked independently. What is definitely known is that Dawson is known to have faked a large number of other antiquities that he so-called discovered, such as the Roman and medieval relics. Now, there's a lot of books that you can pursue, but whatever. So, is this a hoax or a fraud? It's probably a fraud. Harm certainly was done to the reputation of Woodward. Woodward trusted Dawson, and Woodward's reputation was strongly negatively affected by his acceptance of Piltdown, which of course turned out to be a fraud. Now, properly or not, the term Piltdown is routinely assigned to just about every example of fakery these days. The Piltdown bird, Archaeoraptor, probably won't be the last one. Stephen Zirkus, who is an artist and a director of the Utah Dinosaur Museum, paid $80,000 for it in 1999. He bought it from a Chinese dealer who claimed to have bought it from a peasant. That part was probably true. Back in the day, lots of Chinese used to, and probably still do, it's an underground market, black market, find fossils, sell them to paleontologists. Actually, it shouldn't be called the Piltdown bird, it should be called the Frankenstein bird, because it's really, it's a real bird, unlike Piltdown. These were real, genuine fossils. But it's a composite. It consists of at least 3 and possibly 5 separate specimens that the Chinese peasant assembled, glued together, and then sold to the American. Finally, the specimen was given a CT scan by Rowe and colleagues at the University of Texas, and this did definitely identify the Archaeoraptor as being the bones of several specimens. The top seems to be one specimen, but the feet and legs appear to be mirror images of one another. One is the actual bone, the other is the mold of the bone that was sort of flipped over and then glued together to make it look like it was a bilaterally symmetrical left and right leg. It's really only the left leg. And the tail is actually the tail of a small dromaeosaur dinosaur. There are legitimate feather impressions. This is a real fossil. It's a real bird. The red part and the legs are real bird fossils, but they're from 2 separate specimens. It's a very valuable specimen, but it's not the transitional specimen between dinosaur and birds that it was originally hailed at. Well, hoax or fraud? Well, the distinction is, was anybody hurt? Certainly Zirkus and his museum's reputations were hurt by the purchasing of a fossil that was misrepresented. But I'd say this is something of a self-inflicted hurt, since most paleontologists feel very strongly about buying fossils on the black market. I mean, most of us think that this is something that shouldn't be done anyway. National Geographic magazine was hurt even more because, and unfortunately, like Zirkus's problem, this was also self-inflicted. National Geographic was anxious to publish on the new missing link between birds and dinosaurs, and did not wait for the specimen to be described in the professional literature. Articles were submitted to both Nature and Science magazines, and they were rejected. Something fishy about this fossil. The peer review didn't pass. National Geographic published it anyway, and then was caught with egg on its face when it was revealed to have been a fraud. So frauds, scientific frauds as well as Ponzi schemes, have victims and people get hurt. And I want to give you another example of a scientific fraud where the injury is a little different. This is one of my favorite stories of the human Z, Oliver. Oliver was captured as a young chimp, about 6 years old, in West Africa, brought to the US by some animal trainers, Janet and Frank Berger. As usually happens with chimps, they get too big and powerful. Eventually they're handed off to other people. They get handed around until they end up in a wildlife sanctuary. In the case of Oliver, he ended up in a research facility for chimpanzees, where chimpanzees were provided for scientific research. He was rescued from that facility, where he had lived for a dozen years in a 5x7 cage. And he died in a Primarily Primates is the name of the place in Texas. It's a refuge for ex-laboratory animals, so at least the ending worked out pretty well. He died in 2012 at the age of approximately 55. Now, what made people speculate he was a human Z, a cross between a human and chimpanzee, was a suite of somewhat odd characteristics. He was bald, he had a smaller head in proportion to his body, he had kind of funny ears that were kind of pointy, he had freckles, much flatter face than chimps usually have, and he was very friendly to humans, but actually that's not very unusual in hand-reared chimps. They tend to be very people-oriented, and in fact, the claims that Oliver didn't get along with other chimps is understandable as well. Many hand-reared chimps also have a difficulty adjusting to chimp life when they're put back into social groups, because I hope you know something about chimps. They're fascinating animals. They are highly intelligent. They live through learned behavior just like human beings do. They're not little humans, but they are very extraordinary animals in and of their own right. He ate from plates. You're kidding. Let me move right along. He liked to walk erect, which was very odd. His gait was very unusual. Most chimps walk with bent knees. I'm going to do my anthropology thing again. Oh God, this is going to be on tape. If you watch the way most chimpanzees walk, they walk like this. Their knees are bent and they kind of walk along. They're not very good at bipedal locomotion. We walk like this, and it has to do with the way our legs are articulated with our hips, where the way muscles work, and the shape of the hips, the shape of the legs, and so forth. Chimpanzees don't have that, so generally they walk in this kind of odd fashion. Well, he didn't have a striding gait like I was just demonstrating, but he walked a lot more smoothly than most chimps. This was very strange. One way to see if Oliver was a human Z would be to compare his chromosomes. Apes have 48 chromosomes, human beings have 46. And if you were to check his DNA further, you might find that there are more similarities between his DNA and humans, or whether his DNA was closer to that of bonobos maybe, or chimps, or whatever. So this was done in the 1990s. Oliver has 48 chromosomes, just like troglodytes, and there's no reason to think that it's a cross between a human and a chimp. The investigators looked at Oliver's chromosomal banding as well, and his mitochondrial DNA, when compared to chimps and bonobos and humans, showed him most similar to West African chimps, particularly among those from Gabon, which fits very well. So Oliver is a regular pan-troglodytes, not a human-chimp cross, not a human bonobo, not a chimp-bonobo cross, or even a mutant chimp. Well, what explains his appearance and behavior? Well, you can train a chimp to walk upright. It is part of their locomotor repertory. And in fact, this is a macaque, which is much more of an obligate biped, and it is walking as erectly as Oliver does. This is not common among primates, but it's possible. It's within the locomotor repertory. It's rare, but it can happen. Some chimps, some monkeys are just going to be better at it than others. Oliver's flatter-faced, his reduced prognathism, as we say in the biz, this is what a normal adult chimp mouth looks like. Don't get in front of it. It has big front teeth, big incisors, big canines, and notice the bone, the pink part, the bone around the teeth, it really extends out far because the roots of these teeth are really big. This is called the alveolar bone. The alveolus is the bone that supports your and my teeth and all that, that of all the other mammals as well. It makes the chimp have a very protruding lower facial area. It's one of the differences, again, between humans and chimps. We don't have those big incisors and canines. We don't have the big supporting alveolar region. Now, I looked through a lot of footage of Oliver on YouTube. It was very hard, and I apologize for finding only this very blurry piece of him with his mouth wide open. Someone pulled out all his front teeth. I suspect it was pretty early in his life because chimps are dangerous animals. So is Oliver a fraud? Well, certainly in the past, someone pulled out his teeth, shaved his head, and made him walk on two legs. Certainly in the past, several people tried to spread the meme that this creature was a chimp-human hybrid. Was there intent to deceive? Maybe. Probably, at least on the part of some who promoted the human Z. But harm is also a criterion of fraud. And so who was harmed? The various people who paid money for Oliver thinking he was a human Z? Here's Oliver in retirement in a chimp sanctuary in Texas, almost blind, arthritic, with his upper jaw resorbed almost back to his nose. I would say that to mutilate an intelligent, self-conscious, socially and psychologically sensitive creature easily meets the criterion of harm. Well, frauds, hoaxes, and pranks are based on deliberate deception. The perpetrator knows that he or she is being deceitful, but not all falsehood is the result of deception. One can be wrong and sincere as well as wrong and fraudulent. Creationists believe that because all creatures were created at the same time, humans lived with dinosaurs. So therefore, we should find remains of humans and dinosaurs together. The Paluxy River in Texas is a favorite of creationists. They've long claimed to find human and dinosaur footprints together. There are trackways of dinosaur tracks in the Paluxy area river. There's even a lovely state park where you can go and see them. And sometimes you can see these lozenge-shaped features that superficially look like human prints. Back in the Depression, locals used to dig out dinosaur tracks and sell them to tourists. They found that human footprints sold better, so they began to carve out human prints instead of digging out the dinosaur ones. It was easy. Certainly this was fraudulent. There was intent to deceive. The person purchasing these was cheated. But there's also the phenomenon at Paluxy that clearly aren't carved. And creationists point to these as evidence of dinosaur and human coexistence. Obviously, there's alternate explanations for these features, scour marks, eroded dinosaur tracks, or whatever. But the people who promote these dinosaur prints that are obviously not carved are not themselves being fraudulent. They are sincere. If you want to know more, go to ncse.com and look this up. We've got more information on there. But more to the point, very sincere individuals who believe there truly are human tracks at Paluxy are not knowingly perpetuating a falsehood. Being wrong is not the same thing as being fraudulent. Now, just because you sincerely believe something that turns out to be wrong doesn't make you less wrong. I mean, someone who believes the Paluxy River Man tracks are real is just as wrong as those people back in the Depression carving the human footprints out of limestone. But we distinguish between them. There's a little something different with between a misinformed person and somebody who is perpetuating a fraud. For one thing, sincerely misinformed people are capable of having their minds changed with evidence. Scammers don't bother because it's not important to them. And as a quick example of how evidence can change the mind of a creationist on something like this, a geologist, Glenn Kubin, working with others, but a lot of times just himself out there mapping all over in the Paluxy, has made a careful study and proposed a reasonable hypothesis for how the lozenge-shaped dinosaur footprints may have formed. And I'm late, so I really have to wrap this up so that we don't get too far behind in our conference today. But very quickly, what he proposes is that the metatarsal region, which is the part that the arrow is pointing to in the bone diagram there, dinosaurs, like chickens, walk on the balls of their feet. But sometimes, if they're in slippery or some kind of footing, they may actually rest their weight upon the metatarsal as well as the foot, as shown in that second slide there. And then if those metatarsal tracks, shall we say, which are sort of long, but they have claws at the end, obviously, because this is a three-toed dinosaur. If those wear away, they're not going to wear evenly. The toes, being less deep than the middle part, are going to wear away first. And they're also going to fill in with other soil first, and they're going to be occluded. And what Glenn has suggested, and he has demonstrated, is that he can show that some of these so-called human prints over time are revealed as actually being just eroded dinosaur prints. And you can go to his website and see the argument here. Now, the toes were appearing on the front and on the side there. You can see that in the one on the right with the sort of reddish one, oxidized more, is a more recent print, and you can see the infilling is being exposed. It's a very neat little bit of work. Now, what's remarkable about this is that John Morris, a geologist from the Institute for Creation Research, went out with Kuban, was shown the tracks, and has gone on record as saying that these tracks cannot be considered evidence for human and dinosaur tracks coexisting. This is not to say that Morris has given up on the idea that you will find human and dinosaur tracks together someplace, but he and the ICR no longer promote these tracks as being evidence for special creation. Now, obviously, these things are never quite as simple as they sound, right? Because clearly, part of the reason why this happened is because Kuban is himself a Christian, and when he took the ICR people out, they trusted him, they believed in what he said, they didn't think that he was trying to pull a fast one on them, like those mean evolutionists. And so they were able to evaluate the evidence and accept it. So to finish up, let's enjoy our urban legends and even our pranks. Let's be wary of hoaxes, and let's be especially wary of frauds. One can have fun, can enjoy tall tales, and be playfully deceptive without hurting people. And let's also be cognizant that not everything that is erroneous is necessarily fraudulent. There's an old expression, there's a difference between ignorance and stupidity. One of them is curable. Okay. We can modify this discussion to consider that there's a difference between being wrong and perpetuating a fraud. One of them is curable. And the way we cure people from being wrong is to get their trust and show them convincing evidence presented in a logical and persuasive manner. And that's what we try to do at NCSC when it comes to evolution and climate change. And I think that's what all of us skeptics ought to be doing when we're dealing with the public, when we're dealing with our friends, and we're trying to convince them of the joy of science, the power of science, and what a lot of fun science is. So I leave you with those thoughts about urban legends, pranks, hoaxes, and frauds. Thank you very much.